Greetings, everybody. This is Mark Vigoroso, founder and CEO of the Enterprise Edge, and this is another episode of the Enterprise Edge podcast. Thanks for being with us today. We have another exciting episode. I'm very thrilled here today to have with us Bob Cicero from Cisco, and he is the America's Future-Proofed Workplace Director, and it's an interesting topic, very much germane to the topics we cover on this podcast, but a slightly different angle, really looking at workplaces and facilities and places of work and how some of the emerging tech around AI and automation are really reshaping how we think about and manage and optimize places of work, right? As assets, right? So it's a really exciting topic. Before we get into it, let's give Bob a proper welcome. Bob, thanks for being here.
Mark, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And what we're going to do, Bob has spent quite some time at Cisco. He's got a strong legacy and track record at Cisco, one of the most respected technology companies on the planet. Really strong track record of innovation and leadership through many, many phases of disruption, you might say. And certainly the one we're in now around AI is perhaps unprecedented in terms of its speed, magnitude, and scale, right? It's a really exciting time to have this conversation. So maybe what we could do is start out with just to kind of get to know Bob a little bit. I think, again, I've done my research, I believe, correctly, and I think you started at Cisco in 1999 as, I think it was called a lab admin. I'm curious, do you remember what day one was like?
1999, it's a long time ago.
It is.
It is true. December of 1999, if you think about at that point of our history, right, it was the dot-com boom and this massive build out that we were experiencing from a dot-com perspective. And I rolled through the doors day one as a lab admin. And so that role was effectively is that you think back at that point in time where all these proof of concepts were happening with customers, figuring out from the standpoint of, like routing and switching and firewall. And then we were layering these other technologies on top of it with VPNs, right? DES encryption, not even triple DES back in the day. And had to roll through and figure out all these elements that quite honestly, you really don't learn in university, right? So it's fresh out of, undergrad electrical and computer engineering, and it's not something you learn in school. So you rolled into the lab, and all of a sudden it was pretty daunting to see all the technology and the history of, lane and ATM and all these pieces of technology to bring them together effectively to create proof of concepts for customers. As everyone was going through the journey of the dot-com era, and of course, moving to switch networks and 100 megabit, et cetera, back in 99. So it was daunting for sure.
I like to say the late 1900s, right? Well, it's keeping in that world, keep your head in that frame for a moment. Are there any lessons that you say you picked up in that first, not necessarily day one, but in that first sort of round, that first path or project or mentor, any lessons that you picked up early on at Cisco that are still valuable to you today?
I was very fortunate. I was hired by a gentleman that was employee number 291 at the company at Cisco. And the piece of advice that I was given was take risk. Take risk, of course, calculated risk, but also from the point of view is figure out your niche, figure out something that you can use to propel yourself in terms of, effectively creating a name for yourself and building that reputational capital inside the company. So I truly have taken that to heart across my 25 years at Cisco. You think back in 1999, that risk was not only just learning everything that was in front of me that, had to learn on the job, if you would, but also voice wasn't on the network at that point in time, right?
Yeah.
Voice just coming out. IP telephony didn't exist. And people didn't understand server technology, right? Windows NT, if we could date myself back then. And, that was really my niche to get started inside the organization in terms of, building that reputational capital. But that notion of taking risks has always stood with me. And especially now when you think about AI and all the things and how fast the world is moving around this massive technology transition. Fortunately, as I started in 2000, you saw the dot-com. We all know what happened after that. But AI is going to be bigger. And it's surely an exciting time for us to be alive in tech.
Yeah, no doubt. one of the guiding principles of our business is fortune favors the brave, right? Or the bold, right? So I think it says a lot about what you just said, just being forward leaning and taking risks, not recklessly, but intelligently and, with facts and with data whenever you can. Um,
100%. If we're not moving
yeah,
forward, we're moving backward.
yeah, exactly. So maybe as a segue into some of the more, I would say questions that have to do with your remit today at Cisco. Maybe we'll just start with more of a high level table setting question, which is, what are some of the ways that in this world of, very obviously a data intense, data driven enterprise, call it set of requirements, and then you have AI and advanced automation in other flavors. Um, how would you say, and you don't have to list everything, but what are some of the big ways that you're seeing those trends changing the workplace experience? And you don't, we'll have plenty of time to get into details, but maybe just like tip of the iceberg, like what are some of the big rocks?
I think what's fascinating is you think about workplace and you think about the
Hmm.
physical built environment. Um,
Hmm.
Data was never really taken into account when you thought about how to plan space, how to build space, how to operate space, etc. It was
Hmm.
really esoteric, if you would, around this notion of a
Hmm.
badge, and that was really the
Hmm.
gold standard, right, from a data
Yeah.
perspective. And so this notion of all this data that's surrounding us from the IT infrastructure, whether you're counting people like on the device that I'm sitting in front of right now, or wireless, first form of connectivity, it's a tremendous source of data. And that notion of data really amplifying the intersection of people and space was really the first time that's been done, right? Because the industry, and you think about technology moving so fast, of course, AI is moving even faster. From a historical
Hmm.
perspective, like space in real estate doesn't move that fast. It is a slow moving
Right.
industry, but yet they're being
Hmm.
thrust and forced into this notion of using data to be able to drive better outcomes, right? So, like better outcomes when I talk about how big should your rooms be? How are people
Yeah.
really utilizing the space, right? If I badge in, I'm not badging into everything I do inside the workplace. And so that notion of that data really understands how people are really utilizing, which in the day is the function of the space for why are people there? And
Yeah.
so us to be able to ground ourselves in that around meeting size and meeting room sizes and this notion of how many workspaces people touch every single day, that has become now table stakes for organizations.
Yeah. Bob, it makes me think of maybe 2 years ago, I was in Pennsylvania at the headquarters of a publicly traded software company, probably just south of $1 billion of revenue. Gorgeous offices, virtually empty. Um, and really with no, I mean, it's just like a random Tuesday, right? And it was virtually empty and but just state of the art design and aesthetic, and it was just empty. And it just had me thinking like, when was this? Why? Where's the capital efficiency? Are you spending on this the way you'd like to? So I just had a lot of questions, and so I'm using that as maybe one data point. And you think about badge swipes and sort of to your point about more of an esoteric versus data driven approach. What have you seen in sort of in Cisco's own data, right? And you think about Cisco's own workspaces, right?
Sure.
What have you seen that might surprise or shock or maybe even scare real estate leaders about, when and why employees actually show up and, how buildings should be instrumented and how you capture these signals and catalog and analyze that data? Like what are some of those learnings that you think are like those wow moments that could radically change how people think about real estate investments?
It's a great question because you
Hmm.
mentioned that corporation space is expensive, right? It's typically number
Yeah.
two when you look at cost, and people we're 4 years out of the pandemic effectively, right?
Hmm.
When you think about back in 22 when a lot of folks went back to work, and the complaint was I go to work and I'm physically there, but I'm on platform of choice, right? From the standpoint
Hmm.
of virtual meetings, and I might be on a virtual meeting with a colleague that's half a floor over, but yet they're
Hmm.
not driving those collaboration experiences. And
Hmm.
and what we've seen is this notion of when you think about not just space and having beautiful space, But the technology is so critical for us to be able to have an experience that you're creating, that effectively the way we're operating today is technology led. But
Mm.
technology was often thought about last when you think about a space or a space build, et cetera. So for
Mm.
us, we wanted to bring technology
Mm.
forward in the design, where oftentimes when you think about IT was not even at the table a lot of times when design inception occurred. And
Right.
we looked at ourselves and we said, if we have all this data around us, and if we want a great experience for our end users, and we have this notion of earn the commute for competing effectively against the home office, it has to
Mm.
be something unique and differentiated, just not a beautiful space, because a lot of people have beautiful offices at home.
Yeah.
And so this notion of being able to drive these collaborative moments together for us to around this planning of space with the technology infused into it, which
Mm.
literally means that the decisions that we make as an organization now are just not about the space. It's user experience first, then the tech. The rest of it
Mm.
follows, like table shape and table design and room
Yeah.
design. But it was that mindset shift for us in terms of really thinking about the technology first, because that's the experience for people. And that's what we've
Yeah.
seen, right? When you think about some of the data elements that you mentioned before, in terms of some, pieces, like we have, our first office that we did was Penn One in New York, and we view this as a
Mm.
platform approach across the company. So how do we think
Mm.
about, our history as an IT company and our DNA? We think about platform all
Mm.
day long. How can we bring
Mhm.
that same concept to the real estate world for us to build a platform across the globe? And so we're,
Mm.
many sites in, 14 sites in. Penn was our first. But what
Yeah.
was the aha moment was is the oversubscription that we had on the space from a pure people perspective, and the
Yeah.
realization that, gone are the days we were assigning desks, gone are the days we were assigning offices and saying, 150 square foot per person. It was this oversubscription piece of it. But when people do come in, you have to take the friction out. And so when you
Yeah.
look at it was 58,000 rentable square feet, the number of spots to collaborate went up by a factor of 5x old to new. And
Oh,
so I
wow.
think a lot of organizations have missed this notion of thinking about technology first, integrating into the design process, but realizing that those people that are sitting on a meeting platform that are, a half a floor away, they're sitting at their off in their desk, because the room that they might need from a conference room perspective might be, another half a floor away, right? So you're not making conducive for those people to actually collaborate together, because you're making it hard. You're making it hard because maybe you don't have every space outfitted with, the right technology components, which was super critical for us. And I think that's why we've been so successful in terms of this notion of earning the commute, people wanting to be there, because it is based on technology. It is based on the experience piece of it. It is based on taking friction out for our employees, because at the end of the day, we want them to be together. And that we think is the critical piece that why we've been so successful.
It's fascinating. It's probably a good time to ask Bob, just real quick, maybe foundationally, the commercials, if you will, the fundamentals behind this part of Cisco's business. Is it the case that you're offering, real estate developers or facilities managers or corporations kind of an integrated kind of building of the future type service product offering with telephony and platform and stuff? Tell me a little bit about just kind of what you're bringing to market and who you're typically interfacing with to bring it to life.
It's a great question. You look at,
Yeah.
corporations that we service, or customers and clients that we've, quite honestly earned the trust over the past 40 years with, is they're all in the same position in terms of reimagining space. And yet it's 4 years
Hmm.
outside the pandemic and everyone is still doing it. And we think it's going to be this
Yeah.
continuous element. And what we saw was a unique opportunity for us to really think about platform, as I mentioned before, as an, DNA of IT, bring it to this real estate world of thinking just not about the site that's in front of us, but the sites
Hmm.
that are 14 sites after where we are currently today. And we thought there
Hmm.
was a unique piece of not just looking at our individual siloed technology components, but
Hmm.
is there a way to really drive outcomes for the business that are super
Hmm.
critical at the board level on down with a combination of our technologies? And so what we've
Hmm.
landed on was this notion of, or North Star, if you would, was how do we build a great digital and physical experience? How do we bring the
Hmm.
world of virtual and physical together? like, what we're doing today as an example. How do we do that, right, effectively? How do we take friction out of the workplace in sort of that? So like the really experience bucket. The second is around this notion of, sustainability and how do we drive embodied carbon out and
Mm.
operational carbon. And we looked at it
Yep.
and we said, well, that's a unique opportunity, because if we look at efficiencies are gained from connected technologies, but also the energy side. And if, we're now in
Mhm.
the AI boom, we see all the energy challenges, but we're moving everything in our environment over to the network, not for control, but for power. And
Mm.
so as the industry has moved up to 90 watts from an energy perspective in simple PoE terms, we're now connecting all these components together. And so we're not just
Mhm.
providing control, we're controlling the power, and that drives some really sustainable outcomes. The third is health and wellness, right? Which aligns around, the people side of the world, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about the people in the space. And so
Mhm.
you'll see us thread components together of sensors in everything we do. So for example, in our
Yep.
collaboration technology, temperature, humidity, VOC, right? The device I'm on right now has an NVIDIA chip in it that's counting me.
Yep.
That's people count. So there's this data that's coming together from a health and wellness standpoint, and us integrating them with other ecosystem providers like shade manufacturers and lighting manufacturers, all those components. And the fourth was this notion of digitizing space. And so
Mm.
at the time when we launched in 4 years ago, right, it's this notion of data. And everyone said, why are you collecting so much data? Well, we knew AI was going to come. And if you don't have data, you fundamentally cannot get to a great model, because you need data to inform that
Right.
model. So it's
That's
really a
right.
cross architectural view. And if you think about, the components we make and the technology we have as a company, where the network is becoming so much more important for not just the IT side, but for the operational technology side of moving literally every single component, not just for control, but for power. As I mentioned, the network is the power source. We
Mm.
look at the collaboration technology, which is, I gave you the stat before, of 5x increase, but it's the
Mm.
data that's super important. Yes, it's a great collaboration experience, of course, across every platform, but you look at people count, we look at temperature, humidity, VOC, those elements, like that's a source of data. And then you look at Wi-Fi, just not from Wi-Fi capabilities, is we've added radio technologies on top of our Wi-Fi with
Mhm.
Bluetooth and ultra wideband. And you look at that,
Mhm.
that could be an IoT on ramp from a gateway perspective with sensors, et cetera.
Mhm.
It provides wayfinding experiences, ultra wideband, think Apple AirTags, right? Super accurate. But the Wi Fi has become densified in the environment for us to be able to drive those outcomes. Then we wrap all
Mm.
that together with a data platform, right? We call Spaces. And so
Mm.
that was really this cross architectural element where we're not thinking about silos anymore, and we're aligning with those key business imperatives that I mentioned, those four outcomes. And so our customers are
Mm.
asking us for help, right now from a commercial perspective, right, around the corporation
Yeah.
side of it, because they all want to do it. And so it's really this confluence of forces, but also the industry on the way you design and build space has grown up in silos. And we're trying to
Mm.
break down those silos, because it is just not about a single AV experience, if you would, where you get an AV designer, because now that world is moving to AV over IP with, what we call Ceiling Mic Pros, et cetera. So all of this is converging on top of the network. And
Yeah.
not to mention when we think about agentic and what that's going to mean from an infrastructure standpoint. So it's that cross architectural view right aligned to those outcomes where we really thought there was this opportunity that formed this platform that we could take and move around the globe.
Well, it's powerful. It's powerful. And well, maybe I'll ask you this question, and you may not have a quantitative answer, but I'm curious. How do you net out the financial case, right? When it comes to, call it, for lack of a better term, kind of a smart building in its current definition. Smart building, I think, has been around as terminology for many years, but I think in in the definition that you just characterized, is there like a couple big needles that move financially as a result of the transformation that you're describing? I would imagine that, leasing, employee churn, certainly when it comes to capital efficiency, there's probably a pretty compelling worksheet that you can state, what's the business case, what's the financial payoff? Is maybe if you don't have the numbers or average, like what are the buckets? What are the areas of return that you usually talk about with customers?
It's a great question, because you look at, if we provide the data and expose the data, there's a
Hmm.
lot of decisions you can make about portfolio. right? Size of
Yeah.
portfolio, et cetera, from a leasing perspective. So that's like, just think
Yep.
about that as bucket number one, where you can't manage what you can't measure, right? That whole adage. And so
Hmm.
giving the data, now you can make some decisions, right? Depending on where the customer is on their
Hmm.
journey. The other piece is that the stratification of all this technology in the silos that the industry grew up in, we have proven that if we approach the problem set this way, we can break down those silos. So your capital costs on the build side go down, right? And
Yep.
so for effectively, when you think about moving just simple things to the infrastructure, now it's all software driven. So we don't have controllers in conference rooms anymore, but yet we have
Right.
a delightful experience. So we're simplifying the world, not just in the IT element, but all the built environment components where we're taking out systems. So think about, the whole adage of convergence of saying, hey, more systems moving onto, but we're eliminating systems. So that's like bucket number two,
Mm.
when we look at it from a client perspective. And
Hmm.
the other piece is that energy is critical, and we've proven that. For example, that what I mentioned around our first site at Penn One in
Yeah.
New York City, it was a great data comp because we were always in this space, and we have a published case study that shows that not only do we take thousands of pounds of steel out in copper on the embodied carbon side, we took 36% of our energy out.
Hmm.
But meanwhile, the amount of
Wow.
technology went up 5x when you think about just collaboration
Right.
devices, right? Double the
Yeah.
density of access points, all these other components. So you would think on the surface, you would say, wait, hold on, it's actually going to be more, but it's actually less because we have all these
Mm.
connected technologies. We can dial in the entire space. So that's another area of, focus from the standpoint of efficiency, because that's obviously, keeps on providing dividends over time in perpetuity. And the
Mm.
last piece is that just this notion of once you go down this path and once you have all of this, you're in a world of thinking about the workplace in a learn loop, and you can get to this continual optimization phase that people are now looking at. And even Cisco internally, the data that we have is incredibly insightful for spaces. And for us to
Mm.
be able to move quicker from a portfolio decision perspective than we could ever before, because we fundamentally have that data.
Mm.
Those are really the critical buckets, if you would, from the standpoint of when you look at the why. And it's not easy, right? It's the number one question we do get from clients around, like, how do you look at this, right? And we have built a model around those key imperatives, outcomes, if you would, use cases below that, and then how do you structure a design team to make sure that they're adhering to that, so you do get the economies of scale on the outbound side for the what we call the continuum. How do you design better,
Mm.
faster, more cost effective, build it better, faster, more cost effective, IT operate, OT operate across that entire continuum?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. In your experience, Bob, is there a natural, or should there be a natural owner for what you might call the smart building stack as a generic term? In other words, there's probably, like you said, the need for the CIO or some equivalent to be more heavily involved than they've been historically, but then maybe also someone in the maybe COO organization, like a, facilities or real estate type of leader. Is there an obvious single owner, or do you think there is a sort of a joint business tech ownership that is ideal for making this type of, you know, transformational type decisions relative to smart buildings?
It's a great question, right? Oftentimes, those two organizations you mentioned, whether it's IT and the real estate side of the house, are in the same organization. I mean, they may not know each other, right? We've
Yeah.
seen that many times. And so when you look at this, is that you think about back in 2000, did anyone think that voice was going to go on the network? And now
Hmm.
look at where the world's come. I think this is just one of those other moments where it is going to come to the infrastructure. IT will own it. But I
Hmm.
think the difference in this is that it's really, in what we've done as an organization, what we've seen other clients do, is folks that were traditional IT technologists and that wanted to learn more about, call it, the built environment, and people that were in the real estate side of the house wanted to learn more about IT. You put them together, they start cross training each other for the operational role, right? We have a single team across the
Hmm.
globe now that does all this for us. So we see it
Hmm.
as this cross pollination. We do see that IT is so critical, and I think that any IT leader needs to think about not just responding to demands of the business from a real estate point of view, but you have to be front and center in the design process up front. You should be at the table in that first meeting, because it's just not connectivity anymore. It's just not, hey, I'm going to put a collaboration device in a room. It's all these other pieces that come together to be able to drive those outcomes that we mentioned before. And that is so critical for organizations to realize.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, yeah, I think, well, in my experience, I've been around a little while, and this is probably the toughest time to embark on like what you might call long range strategic planning, because nobody knows. Nobody knows what the world's going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I mean, there are always prognosticators, but I think things are moving so fast and at such a scale that we're using past frameworks that don't apply to the AI era, right? In terms of the magnitude, and not even to mention quantum computing, right? So the reason I say that is I wonder, and it's a question, I guess, for you and your team, how far out are you thinking with regards to this smart building transformation and sort of this mandate to, take a more compute first approach to facilities? How far out are you thinking and planning, and what are you anticipating as sort of the state of the state, whether it's 2030 or 2028 or 2040? How far out, and what would be some of the characteristics that you're going to see in that future state?
Yeah, it's a great question, because you talked about long range strategic, LRSP, right? Long range strategic planning.
Yep.
How do you do that in a world that's moving so fast from an AI standpoint?
Yep.
And like the way we've approached this, we think we're in a really good position because of the fact that it is a platform approach. It's all driven on software. We have the data, right? So if we think about a world in 2030, the world of agentic is coming. It's coming fast and furious, right? You see some of the things with OpenClaw, et cetera, that are out there now, and the rapid, growth of those open source projects that started that way, right? It's this note where we think the world is going to be in the agentic side of it, right? Is we often think about our digital counterparts, digital workers. It's going to be our agents, right? We're going to have 10 of them, each of us, 100, who knows? But then we're thinking about an agent for every space. Like think about a four-walled space, an agent for every place, right? We're obviously going to have agentic AI, AI ops, right? From an IT stack standpoint. But then we think about the OT stack as well, because we've converged all this. We have the data. We should be able to drive models that are across all these pieces of data that I just mentioned before. That's going to be yet another set of agents. And I think that when you think about the role of infrastructure in that, you think about, where we think about AI today, whether you're using ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, the traffic is bursty, right? It spikes. And so we have to have an infrastructure and architecture that is sustained throughput for all this agentic communication. And so now that we have everything connected, right? And now we're going to think about the agents for not just, digital workers, but the agents for every space and the physical constructs, right? Every place. That's where we're going, clearly. And I think what's interesting is the ramifications of, for us as humans, and you think you touched on some of the organizational changes, the way we think about this have to change. But also when you think about knowledge workers sitting at their desk of old, it's really going to be the human interaction that's going to be the amplification factor of why humans get together versus sitting there and doing work, because that work's going to be done by the digital worker. On the flip side of it, we think about the facilities piece of it. I don't think it's so far-fetched to think about robots coming in, right? And the humanoid aspect of what's being developed. Like if we have the data, if we have the model, right, and we have the agents, then it could be a robot that's dispatched to repair something or check something out in a room that's broken, that was self-reported by the agents that are working under the covers. But meanwhile, those same agents notified your digital counterparts that don't go there, go here, because we know there's an issue. I think that is honestly table stakes when we think about the agent piece of it. And then as the robotics side of it comes in place, you start to see some of those pieces. I was just in an airport, and you see the cafeteria trays running through on a robot, right? That's not a human anymore. And so that FM side of it, the facilities management piece of it, you think about those humans today, it's going to be robots.
Yeah.
But how do you position yourselves? And I think the only way to think about it is a platform. You can't think about
Yeah.
individual silos anymore. It's not going to get you to where you need to be. And
Yeah.
that also then to me forces an organizational shift as well in terms of who needs to be involved and what does that truly look like for
Right.
success on a long-term basis.
Yeah. I mean, there are companies out there like, like Boston Dynamics, right? That, in the robotic space, physical AI, I guess, is,
It's,
the trendy terminology because
right.
they're robots. They're physical objects that are performing tasks semi-autonomously or fully autonomously integrated with, like you said, perhaps, other agents that are giving it, direction, right? So I totally buy that. I totally buy that. And um, so, gosh, I mean, we keep going forever, but I do maybe we'll wrap up with a few questions, Bob. And you've given some really good advice, I think. But, I thought maybe I'll give you one last shot to, for some nuggets, for some sound bites. Like if you're talking to people in this community, we've got, I don't know, 65,000 people at least in sort of this community. And then there's tons and tons more that listen in. And if you were to say, okay, if you're an IT leader, if you're an FM leader, if you're a real estate leader, a COO, what are the kernels of advice if you're embarking on an office transformation or a capital efficiency program or if you're at all interested in affecting some of these changes, what are some of your advice, maybe 2-3 kernels that you would give them?
Yeah, if I'm a real estate leader, embrace the data. IT has a
Yep.
lot of data that can
Hmm.
help you make the right decisions, right?
Hmm.
Like I mentioned before, with meeting size, et cetera, like we have that data, use it. But
Yep.
that notion of data is super, critical for that audience to, realize. On the IT
Yep.
side, it's embrace. It's going to happen. And
Mm.
IT, I think, is better positioned than ever right now in terms of this convergence opportunity. And of course, they're being hit with the AI enablement inside their own organizations. But
Hmm.
think about the real estate side of the house, and if you're in a organization, meet with the real estate leader, understand what their
Mm.
plans are, and interface with them at the first meeting. Don't think
Yeah.
about the technology last. And I think oftentimes what they'll realize is that there's all these synergies that they can realize. And let's face it, everyone is underneath budget pressure all the time. And so
Mm.
what we're seeing too is this notion of budget sharing that's starting to occur between organizations. So that would be for sure on the IT side of the house. And if you're a facilities management leader or organization that provides those services, is that your company, a lot of times that's outsourced. Your customer has a lot of data that's in IT. How do you get
Mm.
exposed to that data to then be able to provide better services and capabilities to the organization to leverage their elements on the IT side that you traditionally didn't think about before inside of that? And I think it's awareness, right? It's just this. I think a lot of organizations are realizing this aha moment. If
Mm.
you would around, if we're all talking about AI, of course, but then you think about physical, you think about amplifying people's space, right? And the technology role in that, you have to interface up front. You have to think differently about it and approach it with an open mind, especially on the IT
Mm.
front, because everything is coming fast and furious and more is coming to the infrastructure. It's just the facts. And so how do you
Mm.
embrace some of that? Because you're in the middle of a lot of the transitions and can be super successful if you embrace it.
No, it's fascinating. The data piece is, I don't know how many times we've said data, but it's certainly the foundation. And I'm really curious about, like, is it far-fetched to think at some point, maybe it's near term, I don't know, that companies could correlate or maybe even drive causal relationships between environmental factors like temperature, background music, with productivity and performance, right? You have to say, you know what? This AI model is telling us that when the temperature is such and such, and we're playing background music from the 1990s grunge movement, right? We're seeing higher productivity from our employees. Is that ridiculous, or is that like possible and maybe even valuable?
It's not. And there's a standard out in the
Yeah.
marketplace called well, right? A well
Yeah.
standard, which defines noise levels. It defines,
Yep.
ambient light. It defines all those components. It's based on biology, right? But
Okay.
it
Okay.
also, you think about the neurodiverse nature of humans, right?
Yep.
Depending
Yep.
on the data that you read, it's 20% of the world's population is neurodiverse. And so what you just mentioned is 100%. We often think about,
Yep.
in the future of like, this notion of, biohacking from the point of view of saying, okay, what if I can take the data from an Oura Ring, from an
Mm.
iWatch, from a Whoop, from all these
Yeah.
devices, and it's just not, you're in a space, the meeting gets stuffy because it's a tough conversation. You're getting all this bioinformation data to then be able to drive different types of, temperature and, fresh air resets, all these other components. That's
Mm.
100% possible. It's possible
Mm.
today.
Yeah.
And I think that's more and more going to be there because it's this notion of these disparate data sets that are not hard to get to anymore, that are really,
Yeah.
really going to bring those possibilities together, which I think is going to make a better environment for all. When you think about Cisco Power and Inclusive Future for All, like across some of the work that we've done, like in our London location around neurodiversity and neuro inclusion, it's super
Yeah.
powerful.
No, it's amazing. That's just amazing. I mean, we're almost out of time, and we're unfortunately not going to get to everything, but I think we've covered an incredible amount of land. And I'll close this with maybe one question, a little lighter. We all, I think, I don't know the data, you probably do, but there's sort of this hybrid model that I think we all operate in to some degree, where we're spending some time in office, sometimes remote, sometimes on the road, and it's somewhat fluid. And I'm curious, in your own experience, in your own home office, in which you and I chatted about before we started this conversation, what's like what's an example of like an embarrassing or chaotic thing that has happened to you in your home office during a call with an important executive?
Yeah, it's funny because we were chatting. It was
Yeah.
I often my kids will often pop in, which since the pandemic is okay. But the embarrassing moments were before we had the right technology to actually get rid of the leaf blower, the crying baby, and barking dogs. It might have been a little scuffle between the brothers
Yes.
that was heard before we had the right technology in place. That was probably the most embarrassing moment. But
Oh yes.
now
Oh
moved
yes.
past that from a tech standpoint.
We can all relate. Can all relate, perhaps, to the mute button that wasn't pushed soon enough.
Exactly.
Um,
That mute button. Now it automatically does it. It filters it all out.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Well, Bob, this has been awesome. I know that the global folks that pay attention to what we're doing here are going to be intrigued by everything you've said, and I think it's relevant to almost every corporation on the planet. So thanks for taking the time, and appreciate it. We'll have you back at some point. We'll get a progress report, but really appreciate it. Guys, thanks for listening. Guys and gals, thanks for listening. Appreciate your support of the Enterprise Edge community. And that's all for now. We'll catch you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.